Hello and welcome. Today we're diving into one of the most pivotal and frankly heartbreaking moments in American history, the origins of the Civil War. It's a story about how a country can literally tear itself in two.
So let's get right to it. The big question, what really caused the American Civil War? You've probably heard the usual suspects, right? States' rights, economic differences, maybe tariffs. But what if I told you the real story is so much deeper and all those issues were tangled up in one single explosive problem?
You see, the thing is, the Civil War didn't just happen overnight. It wasn't one single event that lit the fuse. Instead, you have to think of it like deep, deep cracks forming in the nation's foundation over decades. Eventually, the whole structure just couldn't hold together anymore. Our job today is to figure out where those cracks came from.
All right, so let's start with those very first fractures. Long before anyone was thinking about secession, there were some serious tensions building over money, the economy, and this fundamental question of who had the final say, the states or the federal government.
I mean, just look at this. It's like you had two completely different countries living under one flag. In the North, you've got this booming industrial economy with factories and wage workers. They wanted protective tariffs to keep their goods competitive. But then you look at the South, it's a totally different world. An agricultural economy based on exporting cotton, and all of it, every bit of it, was built on the backs of enslaved people. For them, tariffs just made everything they needed to import more expensive. This wasn't a small disagreement. This was a fundamental clash of two economic systems.
And this economic fight, man, it really came to a head in the 1830s with something called the Nullification Crisis. South Carolina got so angry about these federal tariffs that they basically said, you know what, we've decided your law is unconstitutional, so it's null and void here. We're just not going to follow it. It was a massive showdown. Could a state just ignore a federal law it didn't like? This was a real test for the whole American experiment. And here's the real kicker. The fight was about tariffs on the surface, but the argument they created, this idea of states' rights, was the big takeaway. That exact same logic, the idea that states could defy the federal government, became the primary political weapon used to defend the institution of slavery just a few decades down the line. It set a dangerous precedent. Which brings us to the heart of the matter. Because while the fights over economics and states' rights were real, they were all orbiting around one central, massive, unavoidable issue: the institution of slavery. This was the one thing that would make any kind of lasting compromise completely impossible.
For decades, politicians just kept trying to put a Band-Aid on this gaping wound. In 1820, you had the Missouri Compromise, which basically drew a line across the country separating future slave states from free ones. But it was just kicking the can down the road. Then in 1854, the Kansas-Nebraska Act came along and ripped that Band-Aid right off. It said, hey, let's let the settlers in new territories vote on it. The result? A catastrophe called Bleeding Kansas. It was a literal preview of the Civil War, with pro- and anti-slavery groups flooding into the territory and killing each other. Every attempt to fix the problem just made it so much worse.
So you get the picture, right? As the nation pushed west, it could never escape this one single agonizing question. Every time a new piece of land was added, the whole country was dragged back into this vicious fight. Are we going to allow this brutal institution to expand, or are we going to stop it? There was just no middle ground left. Now, all this conflict wasn't just happening out on the frontier. It came right back to Washington, D.C., and just shattered the American political system. The very tools and institutions that were supposed to manage disagreements and keep the country together, they just broke. The national political parties, which had been a kind of glue for the Union, just couldn't handle the pressure. The Whig Party, poof, it completely disintegrated over the question of slavery. The Democratic Party, the other major player, split into northern and southern factions that hated each other. And from all that chaos, a brand new party was born in the North, the Republicans, and their platform had one clear, central goal: to stop the expansion of slavery into the Western territories. That was it. Politics wasn't about anything else anymore. 0. Just look at that number. What in the world could this mean? Well, believe it or not, this single number tells you almost everything you need to know about the political crisis of 1860.
That's how many electoral votes the brand new Republican candidate, Abraham Lincoln, won from the entire South. 0. Not a single one. He won the presidency without the support of an entire region of the country. For the South, the writing was on the wall. They looked at that result and believed they had lost their voice, their influence, their power in the Union for good.
Okay, so let's pull all these threads together now. We've talked about economic friction, these huge arguments over states' rights, and a total political meltdown.
But what was the one common denominator? What was the one issue that connected them all, that ran through every single crisis?
He's pretty clear when you lay it all out. That states' rights argument, it was almost always used as a shield to protect slavery from the federal government. Those massive economic differences, you can't separate them from the South's complete dependence on a plantation system powered by enslaved labor. And the political collapse? The parties broke, and Lincoln won because of the fierce, irreconcilable fight over the future of slavery. It was the fuel for every single fire. And you don't have to take my word for it. This is pretty much the consensus among historians today. They might look at it through slightly different lenses. Some focus on the economics, like Charles Beard, or the clash of ideologies, like Eric Foner. But they all circle back to the same fundamental truth that James McPherson put so well. Slavery was the cause. Everything else just threw gasoline on the fire.
So at the end of the day, it really comes down to this. There were lots of tensions, lots of cracks in the foundation for sure. But slavery was the poison that seeped into every one of them. It was the one issue so deeply tied to the South's identity, economy, and politics that there was simply no more room for compromise. And that's what turned all those long-simmering tensions into a brutal, open war.
And that leaves us with this one, really tough question to chew on. When you look at how deep these divisions were and how they all revolved around the institution of slavery, was the war just a terrible failure of political leadership? Or, by the time Lincoln was elected in 1860, had it become grimly, tragically, and utterly inevitable? Something to think about. Thanks so much for tuning in.